I'm very happy to be here today. Here's just some of my contact information, but I'll give you a brief update of light text and the context from where I'm coming from. We are a consulting firm. We've been around for about 30 years, and we've done a lot of policy and procedure development from scratch, or maybe content conversion, user guides, employee manuals, lots of training programs, facilitating those training programs, process mapping, business analysis. And this is primarily for the financial services and government sectors. So these are areas that have large amounts of content. They have lots of policies. They have lots of procedures. Their audiences are multifaceted. External customers, internal customers, lots of employees. So RoboHelp has become a tool of choice for us as consultants in working with these large content organizations. And so we do a lot of implementation consulting and RoboHelp training. So I am coming from an external consultant perspective, but you can certainly reframe this in terms of your internal customers if you're an employee of an organization that's looking for some large content assistance. So this webinar is, taking on a lot as Stefan was identifying the areas that we'll cover. It's really everything soup to nuts from getting started with the project to completion. So I'll talk about like the best practices that we have experienced here at LightText in the past 30 years in working with large scale projects and customizing those projects for the specific audience that we're working with. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll show you several examples of how we were able to scale those projects in various ways using the tools and the features and the functionality of RoboHelp to make sure that they were ongoing, sustainable, usable help systems that could grow as the organization grew or as the needs of the company grew. So the basic elements of a plan, whether it's a large scale plan or a small one, but this is particularly important with large scale implementations, are these 8 steps. Really understanding what the current state is, building a prototype to show the future state, having project plan, building the content, reporting on the progress, gaining feedback, and then training and marketing the product. You can see in these steps, like the building of the content is really just right here in the middle. And it's obviously, the core function that you're doing, but the items that go before that and the items that go after that are just as critical for success. You can build content, but if it isn't designed to enhance the end user's experience, or it can't run on a good project plan that has a completion date, or there's no good transition in terms of trading and marketing, then it likely will not be as successful. So in this presentation, I'll be focusing on the items that go before that and reporting the progress and gaining the feedback, and then just talk a little bit about the importance of author training and marketing the product. Although marketing the product is something that you're doing sort of all along the process. So I'm going to go ahead and start with identifying the current state. So, there's a need in your organization or with a client, in my case, to get some content developed, whether that's procedures. I work a lot with internal procedures. So if I say that, you'll know from where I'm coming from. But you really want to understand when you have a large project that you're embarking on, what is your ultimate user's desired experience? And so the way that I go about understanding this so that I can design the appropriate help system is by really honing on these 5 items, which is who are the users of the help system? And this is typically not just one user. There's typically more than one user. It could be that there's an external customer and an internal customer. It could be that there are new employees that need to use the content as training material, and experienced employees or management and auditors. So there's all types of users of your help system, and understanding who they are and what they need from the content, what they're not getting currently if something exists, is really important. Which sort of goes into the pain points. What are they experiencing now that's not working for them? Is it because something doesn't exist? Is it because it's not navigatable? Is it because it's not, it's a lengthy and cumbersome process to update? There's duplication. What are those pain points that are being experienced? I really like to gather existing documents at the onset to just see what it looks like. Whether their current documentation is, maybe they're using a tool like RoboHelp right now, and it's just converting existing content and getting it shored up. Or maybe there's nothing that exists, or whatever exists is very disparate. That's an important thing to gather at this stage. What is the purpose of the content? Kind of goes along with who are the users, but how is it being consumed? How is it being used? Why is it important? Why does it have to happen? Why does it need to be there? And again, just like there's multiple users, there's typically more than one purpose of the content. And then what is the level of detail required? So is this something that you're looking for, down to the screenshot field description level, or is this more higher level, or is it both? And it can be both. So these are the types of things that you want to discover early on, so that you can understand what the current state is and map out a plan for the future state. So future state starts with the prototyping. So once you have gathered some of their content and understand some of the needs and the expectations of the new system, this is
Hi, Beth. It seems that we lost your audio.
there. Am I back?
Now you're back. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, the plug.
Was for like maybe 30 seconds.
Okay. All right, well then I'll just go back into this slide. So after really understanding the current state and the customer's needs, prototyping and kind of helping the customer understand and see what the future could look like, is what we're doing here with the prototype. And this doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process of prototyping. It's simply a matter of just providing some structure in terms of creating some nice master pages and some branded style sheets and a web layout with logos and fonts and colors that match the company's branding and websites, etc. And then, of course, this is your opportunity to show some relevant features that you gained from your sort of current state analysis. And these might be things like if you're doing something for a call center, you absolutely would want to show some micro content, because those are quick answers to questions that a rep could use to respond to a customer's questions. Content filters, if you're dealing with multiple audiences, I would demo some of that. If there's a need for different users to parse out information that's relevant for them, especially with large content sources where that we're talking about here that have to be scalable, and you don't want to end up duplicating. Filters can be very nice feature to present in a prototype. If you have a lot of screenshots, considering drop downs and also glossary and snippets and other reusable features so that you can demonstrate to your customer how you would not need to replicate in content in other ways. And we'll go over what that might look like. But this is the time for you to show these features and get feedback and get buy-in. And I found once you do this, and from my perspective, this is sort of the go-ahead to get started. And if you're really listening and address those needs, it sort of sells itself. So at this stage, along with the prototype, is the project plan. And of course, we're all used to working with project plans. There's a template that I'd like to share with you that I've found really helps with large scale implementations. I actually give the template to my client and have them populate it and identify their priorities, whether or not there's existing documentation, if there's gaps, so that I have a sense of how much of this is something that needs to be developed from scratch through interviews, or if it's content that maybe is already in RoboHelp, or it's in PDFs, PowerPoints, spreadsheets, whatever, what is available to me. And then at this stage, I also like to number my topics. And even if you're not going to be using a numbering convention in your ultimate output, in your topic name, for example, it's really helpful at this stage with large implementations to keep things straight, to keep your users on track, to ensure that you've captured everything that's in the scope of your project. And I actually even use my file names and start the file name with the topic number to keep things straight so that I can run reports from RoboHelp. So you also want to make your project plan reportable, and I will show an example of that so that it's a living, breathing document with you throughout the project life cycle. And I found that it really helps get things expedited. So now, once you've done those items, is the time to really start building your content. Of course, this is maybe a process that you might be used to, but it's the typical development cycle of obtaining any source documents, interviewing subject matter experts for gapped content, uploading the content to RoboHelp, continuing to add your navigation and functionality, adding new things as they become apparent to you as you go on and organize the content. You'll find opportunities to use things like snippets, reusable text. You'll sort of get to know your customer, get to know your content, and be able, with proper training and understanding of the tool, add the functionality that you need to make it a real big win for your customer. During the development life cycle, I like to use the build tag feature in RoboHelp to be sort of my needs list. This is where I tag questions in my topics, like links that I need to resolve, questions of unclear content, anything else that needs to be resolved before I can turn over or the project is completed for the ultimate client. And then, of course, I'm going to continually generate the output and update my project plan, which brings me to the feedback life cycle, if you will, which is critical to a large-scale implementation. And I've actually found that in the last couple of large-scale projects that I did this year, we were able to expedite our project time frame by almost in half by having a weekly progress meeting, demoing the content and showing the progress. And the reason for that is that we kept our end user on track with any deliverables that they needed to give to us, such as approvals, content, etc. But it's very inspiring for them to see the build and to gain engagement and ownership of the process. When they do that through weekly meetings, they want to expedite it. And I've had at least 2 customers this past year say, this is my favorite meeting of the week, because it's just something fun for them. It's being built and they're seeing its use and they're providing feedback and gaining ownership of the process. So in this weekly feedback, I like to demo the output as it's been built to date, ask questions that I have. Again, anything that I've had tagged that I need to ensure that I get a resolution for, I can do that. Again, any feedback needed, how do you like this? The design from the prototype does change over time. So, incorporating any kinds of changes to that. Showing the progress. And again, I will show you how the project is tracked when we do projects through our project tracker. Set next week's goals and incorporate any feedback from the client, continue the build, and continue on a weekly basis. Sometimes it might be every 2 weeks for maybe even longer term projects, but for a typical project, I think a weekly feedback and review is really important for everyone. Ultimately, I want at the end of the day for my clients to own it and feel that they put it together. Even if we built the content, there was so much ownership on their end that they feel a sense of value in the end product. So with that, as you're going along, kind of wanted to discuss scalable content considerations. So this is something that we consider with large-scale implementations in terms of how many authors are going to be involved in updating this content, and that might make a difference on how we might want to build it and scale it. If there's one author that's doing everything, that might have one plan. If there's multiple authors, if they're in different, siloed differently, that might make a difference on how we build and scale the content. If at some point in time you discover that the content got really big and you need to break it out, how that can be accomplished, or in some cases, the first implementation that you do is so successful that other areas within an organization want to replicate it. And if so, it can fall under a larger umbrella. And we'll talk about solutions for that. So those are some scalable considerations that you're thinking about as you're building the content. You're also, of course, thinking about various audiences. Who's consuming the content? How can we scale to that? And when I think of scaling, I'm thinking about, not only how big it is, but how can we make it so that it's a one-stop shop and that various users and various audiences can utilize this content without replicating it, without duplicating it, without having to go to different sites, etc. Which goes along with multiple uses. How is it being consumed and for what purpose? So let me give you some examples of that. And these are ways that I've found to scale content. Again, really when you're doing that initial current state analysis, that's where you really have the ability to take your knowledge of the software tool and your creativity and their needs and pull it together for a workable solution. And everything, every implementation looks a little different, but if I was to, parse it into most typical scenarios of scaling content, this is probably what it would look like. So typical scenario is that I have multiple audiences. And instead of creating two sources of content, with the example of an external facing content and then maybe an internal facing content source that are almost the same but have some nuances, I can apply content filters. I can create some unique layouts for both of those different experiences instead of replicating everything, and make it so that it's scalable and sustainable over time. If I'm in a scenario where I can see that it's going to need to expand to more groups, we've created an output for one department, say, for example, expanding from a department to a division, where you have like users and you want them to be able to search and navigate to all the content. That's where you can easily take the project that you've done, build other projects, and put them into a merged output, or utilize Adobe's RoboHelp server, which is a companion product that allows you to publish your content and actually get some reporting and user analytics from the content. But you can also do that as a merged output. So anyway, that is an example of how you can scale your content as you're going, because you may not know all these answers right up front. They come to you as you develop, as new opportunities arise, and it provides you with the opportunity to scale. So the help system needs to be used for more than one purpose. I'll be sharing these examples, these actual live examples from content that we've created, but this is a fun one for me, and I really like it. But here is where maybe you've got a web output that's done by your authoring team, and it's used for procedures or web content, user guides, etc. But then there's training that needs to take place for the same group of people. We're often in organizations where you have a procedure or communications department and a training department, and we're replicating information, and it doesn't stay in sync. Using RoboHelp and organizing your content, creating multiple tables of contents, creating different kinds of output like PDFs for training guides, web frameless output for web information, is a way that you can multi-purpose your content by tagging it for various audiences and churning out the same, it's tailored content for those different types of purposes. Again, we'll go over some examples of that. Having various levels of detail in one source. I think that there's a lot of ways that we can accomplish this. Financial services, there's a big push on having regulatory procedures lately that have to be audited and reviewed for risk purposes, but there's also job aids that are necessary for an employee to do their jobs, and they're in the process of being sort of decoupled, and understanding that these don't actually have to live in two different areas. They can live in one content source, utilizing drop downs perhaps for the more detailed screenshots, creating a different parsed table of contents for job aids, and procedures is a way that you can sort of accomplish two objectives in one layout, so that we don't duplicate and we don't continue to have different areas doing almost the same thing. Another scenario that happens and commonly and may require us to scale our content would be if projects just get too large. This happens a lot with legacy content. where we've got real asset heavy projects, lots of topics, lots of images, lots of, I don't know, maybe even video. It needs to be a seamless resource for the end user, but for the authoring team, it's just not working anymore. It's too large, it's too bulky. So again, with merged output, or maybe utilizing RoboHelp Server, we can accomplish the authoring team's objectives, but also the end user's objectives to have a seamless resource. So with that, I'm going to leave the PowerPoint and actually just dive into some demos to show you what examples are of these different elements. So I'm going to start with showing you a typical prototype that can be developed for a brand new project, what a project plan template would look like, and then the ultimate project plan that's tracked and reported during your weekly progress, and then show you some scalable examples for different clients that we've had over the years. We've done, after 30 years, we've done, hundreds and hundreds of projects. So finding, sort of the routine and the typical way, the most effective way to work on a project is something that I'm hoping to leave you with today. So we'll show some scalable examples so that you can see how you can address all sorts of different issues that your use case might have. So I'm going to end this and dive into some examples. I'm going to start with a prototype. So this is a bank that we do a lot of work with, and they came to us with some very rough documentation and said about 3 or 4 topics, and asked us to help create this content from scratch. And they really needed a lot of, they didn't have any templates in mind. They really didn't have any sort of structure. So very quickly, just by taking some of their colors from their website and doing some simple branding, this would perhaps change over time. We can put a prototype together that can kind of help them see from their individual PowerPoint slides and PDF documents and spreadsheets and Visio process maps, how you can kind of pull it together into something that's standardized. So this is a frameless layout for those of you who are not familiar with RoboHelp 2020 and or not familiar with RoboHelp as the software, but this is a little micro content, a glossary term. I can go right into my topic from here. And this actually has a filter on it. I'm going to remove that. So I just took 3 procedures, and these procedures are very, very rough, but just starting with a nice master page, and they needed to have a numbering convention, but getting some standard structure into each one of their, whether this was a PowerPoint or Word document, pulling it together so that they could see how it could look like in a uniform fashion was helpful for them. And again, at this point, I don't want to go into really revamping their content because we're not there yet, but just kind of give them an idea of what the future could look like. Because they have a lot of workflows in their content, seeing how they can image map their topics or their workflows to detailed procedures was something that would be important to them. There's going to be lots of audience roles in this ultimate document source to filter it by the different audience. You can see over here on the left, if I choose banker, only the banking topics appear, solution architect, etc. So, they were very pleased to see, what a filter might look like, what that means. And of course, just some of the generic features of a frameless layout, like I can add favorites here and share my content. I can pull together a nice glossary, index and glossary so that, this in and of itself is a content reuse item so that we don't keep on having to spell out acronyms, or we don't have to continually redefine terms. So that's an example of a quick and dirty, probably took just a couple of hours to put this together, but it's an important part of getting their feedback and helping them see what the future state could look like from where they started and where we are now. So with that, I'm going to share some project plan. Here's a template that I use, and you can see this is just very generic right now, but this was for a company that we just provided them with a little shell for Home Express Mortgage, brand new company, and they needed to document 211 topics. When I say topics, some of these were actually small user guides and small manuals in and of themselves, but they needed to have everything in place for regulators within a 2-month period. So, embarking on that venture had to be highly structured and highly organized to meet that deadline. So providing them with a little bit of a rough outline based on what they gave me. They had a couple of manuals: operations, sales, and administration. And here's the sub chapters. And then we had them populate the remaining of this. So what this ended up looking like once it was populated and once it was working was this. So we, over time it morphed. There was manuals and subsections and then sections and then topics with topic IDs. And because a lot of this had to be developed from scratch, nothing existed. There were a lot of statuses, being developed, subject matter expert approval, all the way to the end, which would be sent to incorporation into RoboHelp. And there were different teams doing different things, but it was a collaborative effort, which all of these projects are, between your customer and your development team. I mean, they cannot be done in silo. As we all know, there has to be rapid approvals and good turnarounds. So using this type of format to track progress, we were able to report off of it. And here it is sort of towards the end. And this is one that we did accomplish in the project timeframe. I still don't even know how, but it really has to do with a lot with the project tracking and presenting on a weekly basis, because there was a lot of buy-in by the ultimate customer. And, they would go right into their areas of what needs to be, edits in progress or first draft developed, or, where were they in the process, and so that they could take ownership of their pieces and we could take ownership of ours. So I'm hoping that that's helpful to you in seeing how you can report and, start with something very basic, but, really have it be a useful tool for you over a project life cycle. Excuse me. So I'm going to go back into some demos here. This is that same company, Home Express, and this is a great example of a scalable project in terms of how it started and how it ended. This is a frameless output that they're using. We always try to provide some sort of announcement topic so that many of you are familiar with this, but where do we announce our updates within the content itself? So when you get into this project, this is this 211 topics. So there's a lot of content in here. And so where we started was not really knowing how big everything was going to be. And where we ended was finding out that this really, even though we put it into one large project, it wasn't going to work like that because there were specific authors for operations, there were specific authors in the organization for sales, and specific authors for administration, and they needed to support their own content. So in the end, we pulled this into a merged project output that looks, I'm going under the hood, but each one of these has their own RoboHelp projects, and we created a shell or parent project and merged in the three subordinate projects into a merged output. Again, this can be done with RoboHelp Server, same sort of process, but it allows the three different authors to create and update their content independently, but it all gets rolled up in one because the end user's experience needs to look like this. They need to have a connected guide. This is also a good example of there's so much put into this content because they really had to document everything down to, their vacation schedule and, during COVID, the protocols there. So lots of, this is very screenshot heavy, using drop downs and things like that really helped address multiple users. So scalable in the aspect that it could be broken up easily, but it also can be sort of a series of steps, or it could be really more of almost tutorial process. So that's an example of that type of scalability. Another example, completely different, but still the same, is a project that we did for the state of Vermont. And I'm going to go actually just right into the RoboHelp application because I think it will make more sense. So this is for the state of Vermont, their food and nutrition program. And they have a program manual that's available to their customers on their website. And it's called the Business Rules Project. And it has all these topics. And then they have an internal staff that uses the same content, but they have a few extra pieces. They have some extra topics. They call themselves BPS. It's a support area. And then within the topics, they have some content that's specific to them. So they did use an older version of RoboHelp in the past. You can see that there's some items here. We tagged those as being specific to this particular output. So this is BPS only content, these topics and these words within the topics. So prior to revamping their content, they actually had two completely separate manuals, and they tried to keep them in sync, and it was double the workflow. They actually had, this is their calculations, but a 7,200% reduction in authoring time based on this new structure. So by tagging the content that was applicable to this group, we were able to just simply create two different web layouts. One was for their customer-facing content, and the only changes are the title is what the customers need to see, and the content has a condition expression. The internal content has a different title, and it has no condition expression, so nothing's being suppressed. So just with those easy solutions, we were able to create one content source. If I look at work requirements, that's that topic. There's some micro content in that as well. You can see that if I go down here to the end, there's a BPS support section. They also have their other topics that are applicable just to their use case. So this is what's developed for run or generated for the internal folks. And this is what's published on the customer-facing website. Same thing, just has a different title. It works exactly the same way, but you can see here there is no BPS content, there is no BPS topics. So very scalable because two audiences were accomplished in one set. Another thing that's just kind of to note about this one is that there's a lot of complicated numbering structures, which is required by their state partners, and using good style sheets and ways to automate this process made things much easier for them so that they were able to meet their partners' requirements, but also make it workable for their end users. So another example is leaving kind of government and going on to finance. This is Pacific Premier Bank, and we just finished this resource for their banking operations group. I'm just going to go right into the content here, and this is another scalable solution. Here is the scenario where they have regulated procedures, and they have to follow a very specific format, purpose, scope, procedures, some ownership and responsibility tracking, revision information. So all of their procedure content looks like that. Their job aids were in a different location. Instead, we incorporated them into one source, and you can see that these lay out, as they should. There's definitely screenshots and things like that are not in the procedures, but it allowed their folks to have sort of a one-stop shop. And this is retail banking, so they're very task-oriented. It's the retail banking area of the bank. So their job aids are not only incorporated where the customer needs to see them, so that the end user has their ultimate experience, but they're also located here. So again, two customers, regulatory, risk related, and also the employees that are doing their job. So it just makes it sort of a one-stop shop. Because this was so successful, the organization said, we've got to expand this to our whole division. So we've mapped out what the layout will look like in the future. So there'll be retail banking. This is Premier Source. It was just renamed, but these are the different areas. They're looking into RoboHelp Server, or they can do a merged output to merge these different projects together. Like audience, it needs to be searchable. But again, it's scalable because it can get bigger over time. And then my final example that I would like to show you is one that we did for a company called PennyMac. They're a financial mortgage lender. This is sort of different and unique, but this is their online help that they use internally for their employees. And we helped develop this for them when they were brand new. I mean, they were ramping up employees and customers, and they were onboarding lots of customer service reps and needed not only procedures, but they needed training, and they had limited support staff. So instead of reinventing the wheel for training and procedures, we we already had this developed, and so we took the online help, and from there, by using build tags and different unique tables of contents, we created training materials that were used in their classrooms. So if you look right here, this is the same content, but this is the Leader's Guide. That was the Customer Service Leader's Guide. They have some extra topics that aren't in the web content because they don't relate to that. But that's the leader's notes and getting started for their class. Up here, it's suppressed, but there's actual, leader's note with notes, which PowerPoints you should supply, etc. These are notes for the participant and the leader that are right here, but they're suppressed in the output. In this output, the links are suppressed because it's not needed in the PDF format. So these are sort of like going on this on and on. This format was created. So the participant's manual doesn't have the leader's notes. It just has the side information. But there's also other topics. I think there's some knowledge checks. This is the leader's version, so it has the answers to their quick review. So you can see that, so we've got this, and whenever this is updated, these topics are updated as well. There's no need to keep two separate documents in sync. And let me just show you briefly what that looks like behind the scenes. So here from the authoring perspective, I actually upgraded this into RoboHelp 2020, so the tags are sort of they're underlined. Sorry, they're shaded, and I'd probably change that to be underlined so it's not so scary for the author. But this is the main table of contents. This is the leader's guide, which has the leader's notes, the quick review. Here's the participants manual that doesn't have the leader's notes, but it does have the quick review without the answers. There's actually also a certification program that's run here that's output in a different format. And if I look at my output, my printed documentation might not have this set up yet, but I'd have to set up the condition tags, but the condition tags are, let me look at the one for the online version has condition tags that ensure that the content for the leader's guide and the participant's manual and the training content are not displayed. So here's the condition expressions that were created for this. So it sounds sort of complicated, but once it's set up, it's really great because, again, 90% of the content is the same. In fact, probably 95. It's just some of the information needs to be stylized for a particular output. So that, little work up front and planning it out and creating it really went a long way in ensuring that two different groups in an organization were in sync, that they weren't duplicating efforts, and that they were able to sort of maximize the resource that they have existing in their organization. And I think that would be sort of my final note. I've shared an awful lot with you. I'd be happy if you want to email me on the side. Let me go back to my presentation and give you my contact information. Sort of tying the bow once you have your content created, ensuring that your authoring staffs are well trained is really important. They need to have formal training. They have to, in order to provide this service, you have to know what the software does and you have to know how to employ it. If the training is not there, then it's really hard to understand how you can fulfill your client's needs. And another important kind of like tie-in is making sure that ultimately you market this to your client. At the end of all of these projects that I just shared with you, we provided our clients with PowerPoint slides. They presented it to their customers, helped them understand and gain buy-in into the resource that was developed for them. So all of that is important in creating sustainable experiences. Hope that gave you some insight into understanding how you can scale content. There's so many different ways, but knowing that you could take things apart, knowing that you don't have to have like separate manuals or separate guides for everything. You can have a one source stop. Understanding that the resources that you might have in place today might be pretty good. And, there's something that you can really leverage. That first prototype that I showed you, the source documents were really all over the place. HomeX, oh my goodness, that was like just from a million different sources. But in the end, having a nice prototype that you map to, having some standardization that you've built in with master pages and style sheets can really provide you with a good resource for your end user.